Hello everyone and welcome back to 80 Days. I appreciate that it's not been that long since the last episode, but I've just been having a lot of fun playing. We're here in Yokohama, and we need to find our way over to the States, but it seems like we can get to San Francisco for a lot of money next Thursday, sorry, but we're gonna ask to leave straight away, or before 3 o'clock. We're gonna head to San Francisco. It's gonna take a lot of health off us. But we're taking the Water Lily, and that should get us over to the States by next Thursday. Give us to about maybe day 62. Monsieur Fogg is in decent health, but we need to keep an eye on him over this trip as it's a very long voyage across open water. The Water Lily was a sleek iron-hulled ship to submarine prototype, captained by a severe American by the name of Wicker, who wore a top hat and preferred tea to coffee, which greatly endeared him to Monsieur Fogg. In addition to the usual complement, the Water Lily carried an entire corps of brass-goggled engineers and a brace of submariners on standby, should the captain call the order to submerge. The rumours was that she was a Confederate vessel, sold off to a private concern in the later, more desperate signs of the Civil War. But I saw no trace of a dark past aboard. The crew seemed a happy family and welcomed us into their iron-hulled bosom. Let's converse and see what we can find out about San Francisco. Can we get from San Francisco to Salt Lake? Okay, let's ask you about San Francisco. He doesn't want to talk about San Francisco. Can we get from San Francisco to San Pedro? It's not overly useful. And now we're learning about San Pedro, but we'll learn about San Pedro to Port Royal. That's all they want to know. We can get down to Port Royal and San Pedro down here, but that's not overly useful, I think, That's not overly useful to our way forward. Our cabin, while hardly spacious, was adequate to our needs. One of the midshipmen came by to show us how to use the pressure seals, in case of submersion, but in all other aspects, I looked forward to a peaceful steamship ocean crossing. I was not to be so lucky. Oh dear. What's gone wrong? What's gone wrong on the Water Lily? Let's tend to Mr. Fogg while we can, or Monsieur Fogg while we can, before everything goes wrong, which it most certainly will. The salty air blew cool and sharp against my face as I opened the door onto the top deck. It was painfully early, and the only passengers awake were a group of Chinese labourers hunched miserably near the stern. One of their number was vomiting copiously into a bucket. I've offered him my sincerest commiserations. I myself had developed a sturdy set of sea legs, but I had every sympathy for those less fortunate. Unfortunately, the bilious labourer seems to take my muttered words as some form of challenge or mockery. I retired hastily, not wishing to antagonise them further, and certainly not before breakfast. I cannot abide a quarrel on an empty stomach. Agreed. You cannot do anything on an empty stomach. Let's make sure Monsieur Fogg is still in good health for the long trip across the ocean. I accompanied Monsieur Fogg to a game of whist with a family of American missionaries who were travelling back to San Francisco for a family wedding. My master began strongly, but Mademoiselle Loretta, the eldest girl, had a sharp eye and won several hands in a row. A new round was dealt. I noticed Mademoiselle Loretta smiled triumphantly at my master and played another winning hand. The minister's daughter accepted Monsieur Fogg's congratulations demurely, though I saw a flash of something altogether unsporting in her eyes as she lowered her lashes. It left a sour taste, and I resolved to steer my master away from any further games with the missionary family. I'm very concerned about what's going to go wrong on the Water Lily. We're making good progress across the water. We are fairly low on cash. We're going to be running tight on money to get back to the UK in time. I spent today in the company of the Water Lily submariners. They were all hardy men and women who preferred the dim, enclosed spaces of the hold to the top deck. Too much sky, one of them said, squinting suspiciously. Her crewmate nodded. All that fresh air. They shuddered collectively, and suggested a bracing race to the boiler room. I offered an alternative, having no great desire to sprint through the ill-lit, echoing ship's corridors. Their commander, a short Japanese-American woman, gave me a look of scorn. What do you suggest? I demanded. Well, I'm not going to do drinking contest because that's just going to end badly. So we'll do a test of aerobatic skill. Though the submarines were all fit as horses, they had never attempted to, for instance, form a pyramid or walk the length of the corridor on their hands. They competed with me gamely, but admitted themselves outclassed. Commander Davies even applauded. "It's Izumi to my friends," she said, clapping me heavily on the shoulders as I took my leave. "You're not so bad. Making friends with the people in the boiler room might give us that bit of additional speed to get across the Atlantic? No, wrong sea. I'm in the wrong sea there. I was climbing the rigging. As exercise, of course, not all for the purposes of spying on the crew, to appease my own rapacious curiosity, when I heard the two crewmen arguing in a pidgin, a mix of English and Japanese. I moved hurriedly away, and a moment later heard a scream. One of the sailors had fallen to the deck. I looked up and managed to catch sight of the fallen sailor's companion, his face still and pallid. Was there guilt in his eyes, or merely shocked? He slipped away before the captain arrived, and I followed him. Let's find out. He retired to the crew's quarters, and I began to hear the sound of desperate, muttered prayers. Not all is good on the water lily, it seems. Let's converse. Good day, Reverend. What can we find out about San Francisco? Do you know anything? You don't want to talk about San Francisco. Okay, you do you. What about San Francisco? Let's change to Burlington. Can Burlington get us over to Atlanta? Yes, let's say we do. Let's ask you about Atlanta. Anything useful? Can we ask you about Atlanta to Washington? Atlanta is linked to Washington aboard the Piedmont airline. Very nice. Let's ask you about Washington to Las Vegas. He has to go. Okay. So we've learned from New Orleans to Atlanta, Atlanta to Washington, all the way through to New York. That could help us. We just need to connect the two routes there. However, I'm still concerned about what's happening on the Water Lily. The Water Lily's crew held a funeral for the dead sailor. I was not specifically invited, but felt a sense of responsibility, having witnessed the man's fatal plunge. Captain Wicker led the Christian service with the customary grimness. I was surprised by the absence of the American minister, but later discovered that the captain was a different denomination, and considered the missionary and his family only a step short from heathens, or step up from heathens. Oddly, only half the crew had come to pay their respects. I asked my neighbour about this breach of custom. She narrowed her eyes. Joseph was a convert, she told me defiantly. The captain taught him to read the Bible himself. The rest of the crew are heathens. They stay away from our godly ceremonies. Okay, so we're making decent progress. Still a long way yet to go, though. Storm. Too exhausted to write a proper entry. Suffice to say, we are still afloat. As we settled down for the night, I was struck by an unrelated thought. Monsieur Fogg, the dateline. I have altered our watch already, Monsieur Fogg replied calmly. Did you think I might forget? My master was, of course, correct. With an eye such as his, it was unthinkable that he might miss such a detail. We had reached the point directly opposite Greenwich, where the hours we had lost in travelling around the earth were added back. A whole extra day. Wonderful. As you can see there, we went from day 58 to day 59. Wait, hang on, no, that doesn't work, I'm being silly. Anyway, yesterday's storm hit us with a little warning. One moment I was preparing Monsieur Fogg's shaving water to exactly the right temperature. The next we were being tossed from one end of the cabin to the other. We were only lucky that the bed was securely nailed to the floor. The ship shuddered and moaned as the seas flickered with lightning. The storm lasted nearly 6 hours and blew us far off course. The captain spent most of his day peering at his charts, trying to locate our position. There was no land anywhere upon the horizon. The Water Lily has been blown off course. Let's ensure Monsieur Fogg is in good health. Okay. The captain announced a change of destination. The Water Lily would now make for the nearby Hawaii, rather than San Francisco. We would make port in Honolulu in 5 days. We'd have to find our own further conveyance from there. I think Monsieur Fogg wouldn't be all too pleased. Monsieur Fogg's lips pressed ever so slightly together, a rare outward sign of entirely understandable annoyance. This, my master said, will not do. Indeed not, sir, I agreed, not even daring to calculate the delay and expense our unexpected diversion would cause. Monsieur Fogg gave me a cool, appraising glance. Captain Wicker has reneged upon his word as a gentleman. A gentleman's agreement, he said curtly, before lowering his voice to an almost furtive undertone. Our course is clear. We must mutiny. I opened my mouth to... Yeah, why not? Let's go for it. Why not? It sounds fun, nonetheless. I opened my mouth to agree wholeheartedly, but he continued on without so much as a pause. See to it, possible to. Use your... initiative? I offered brightly. Quite, he said. With the agreeableness of a gentleman who has just given his valet a near Herculean task. We will mutiny in 5 days when we reach Honolulu. Make your preparations as you see fit. Day 16, Monsieur Fogg murmured that night in his sleep. And still some distance yet to travel. Yes, we are running out of time in very much in a hurry. Let's converse, see what we can find out. Honolulu to San Francisco? That's not going to work, apparently. What about San Francisco to Salt Lake City? Route from Salt Lake City to Albuquerque. Albuquerque to Houston. Going to learn some new routes here, but that's not going to be overly useful. Getting to Albuquerque is a useful stop, as is going to Dallas and on to New Orleans, but we're going to really struggle to get home. Oh my goodness, okay. We've really had some issues now. That 5-day going off course has really cost us time we never had to begin with. My task was clear. I was to foment mutiny aboard the Waterloo. I decided to begin by exploiting the crew's animosity towards one another. Divide and conquer, or so Dim a man always counselled. Gossip and rumour would always be a good way to start, I thought. Because such subtleties might be lost on the crew of sailors. So I decided to gossip about the captain, plan to forcibly convert all the Shinto crew when we reach port. Some of the younger members seemed alarmed, but others merely laughed off the possibility. This is not going to go well. Fogg said to have crossed the date line, but will the extra day be enough, says the Times. I don't think it will. I think we've left it too late. We've gone a slightly roundabout way here. It was with satisfaction that I noticed a certain increase in tension aboard the Water Lily, a situation I would carefully have to exacerbate if my master's mutiny was to have any chance of success. Next, I attempted to ingratiate myself with Commander Davis and the submariners. We got on well with them before. We were rather storm-tossed and disgruntled. There were no storms underwater, the commander muttered, her hair a tangle under her cap. We should have submerged, I agreed. Captain Wicker risked all our lives. I think perhaps he does not trust your ability as submariners. The commander's face darkened at my assertion. Perhaps you are right at that, she said. Perhaps so. And what we will do, I think... I've heard him say as much, I added, hoping to press my advantage. The commander's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Is that so? Why would he say such a thing to you? I nodded and winked. You do not know everything about me, I replied. The commander stared back unflinchingly, keeping her thoughts to herself or myself. I took my leave a moment later, hoping my seeds of doubt would soon spread. We continue off into the distance on the Water Lily. I had attempted to suborn the obvious targets aboard the Water Lily, but wars were often won by the unexpected. With that in mind, I turned my attention upon the valets and batmen to the ship's officers. Being a gentleman's gentleman myself, I knew the value of a good servant. Conversely, I was also aware of the disruption a bad one could cause. I appealed to them with my logic and reason, though unfortunately the most reasonable choice for them was to refuse my call to mutiny. They're not particularly happy with their positions, but I failed to offer them a practical alternative. My pleas fell largely on deaf ears. We are running out of time here. I spent the day putting the last finishing touches to my planned mutiny. It was a matter as delicate and serious as the creation of soufflé by a master chef. I spread word of my signal amongst my allies, and stayed up late, ensuring every man and woman on my side was true. We're going to need to make some serious ground if this happens. We've made it to Honolulu. We reached Honolulu in the dark. The captain took a small skiff into the harbour with only a few of his officers, wishing to inquire about repairs before putting the Water Lily into dry dock. Monsieur Fogg watched the boat for a long time. Now is the time, he said crisply. I trust everything is in order. I assured him I voiced my doubts about the readiness of the crew to mutiny, which caused Monsieur Fogg to almost heave a sigh. Let us hope that you are in this case mistaken. With that, my master retreated to his cabin, and I called the signal to arms. The Water Lily erupted into chaos. Everywhere was the clash of sabres and pistols, and now and then I heard the shriek of the officers' sonic weapons. But I was not alone. The half of the crew that followed the Shinto creed fell in behind me, lit with the desire to teach their Christian crewmates a lesson rather than mutiny, but their anger helped stoke the fires of rebellion. The Chinese labourers poked their heads out of their cabin at the noise and confusion, but seemed to decide upon a policy of detached observation. I was only grateful that they did not intervene against my band of mutineers. The submariners, led by Commander Davis, charged out of the hold of the ship like a horde of impossibly athletic avenging angels. There was a long, terrible moment where I wondered at their allegiance. Then Commander Davis caught my eye and winked. It's Izumi to my friends, she shouted cheerfully, driving back any stragglers loyal to Captain Wicker. I think we've pulled it off? No. Okay. By noon it was clear that all our efforts were for naught, however. The mutiny did not have the support and numbers required to defeat those who had maintained their loyalty. Captain Wicker and the other officers returned just in time to smother the last flames of rebellion. My master and I begged to be allowed to remain on board. The captain laughed. I may be a gentleman, he declared, but I am not a fool. It was only due to Captain Wicker's good grace that we retained our luggage. Our mutinous comrades were not treated with such leniency and were thrown unceremoniously below. That was, Monsieur Fogg said with icy precision as we stood up on the strand of the volcanic island on which we found ourselves, rather badly done. Unfortunately, I could not disagree, and relations with Fogg have deteriorated. We have made it to Honolulu, and we need to get cracking. We haven't even made it to the States yet. It arrives next Wednesday. I guess we'll go here. Yeah, we'll go down to Acapulco, but we can't do that till tomorrow. I don't think we're going to make it. I don't think we're going to make it in time. We do not have time to spare. It was as though Honolulu lived in one indrawn breath, a weeding swathe of sky, white-laced waves, and pristine sand bounded by black volcanic bluffs. The town was entirely hidden behind groves of coconut and eucalyptus. We took a short tour. You look, said Okostrava, hila, like city folk. And what do they look like? I wondered aloud. All bent and crabbed over, and with your eyes fixed on the horizon, always in a rush. He murmured something to his horse, which looked well fed and high-spirited. As a young man, I went to San Francisco to make my fortune. I too ran and scrabbled in pursuit of the almighty dollar. We are not running nor scrabbling, I pointed out with affronted dignity. Our adventure thus far had been somewhat harum-scarum. Barely had we placed our toes on dry land, and then we were looking to depart. Oh, I had seen so many wonders, and yet had ultimately been reduced to another mark in my master's ledger. Do you not wish the freedom to exhale possible too? The coach driver asked. To stop running and simply feel the wind upon your face, and the sun warming you, and sound the ocean like a heartbeat. I'll take my moments where I may, Hila, I agreed. There is a peace here, a harmony between land and sea and sky which touches my soul. The coach driver sighed and turned his face up at the endless sky. A man may find himself here, but only if he wishes it. He invited us to his home that evening, and fed us dough-like poi and bright-fleshed slices of orange and guava. I still thought of the marks in Monsieur Fogg's ledger and the distances we had yet to travel. I knew no peace in Honolulu, but my purpose burned bright and drew me ever forward. We finished our night in Honolulu with a souvenir, a swelling conch shell collected from the beach as we walked back to our lodgings. We're departing ASAP. Let's go. Ooh, this is cool. In the Reina Cristina, a Spanish Torres Quevedo type airship, its gondola shaped to resemble one of the infamous Spanish galleons of previous centuries, and as richly outfitted with Philippine hardware furniture, Fijian silk curtains, and lacquered, some of these words I'm just not going to be able to say, ornamental stuff from China. My cabin resembled a fashionable salon more than an airship berth. Hello, good sir. Greetings, first mate. Let's ask about Acapulco. Can't speak. Acapulco. Is there a route Acapulco to anything useful? There's no way we're getting back to the UK in time. It's going to be a really tight run race to get there for day 80. The captain of the Torres Quevedo type airship swapped the Spanish flag flying from the prow to Hawaiian colours. The Mexicans are not fond of us Spaniards since the revolution, he explained. Spanish ships are turned away from the port. Surely they are not fooled. It was a thin subterfuge, if it even deserved the term. He shrugged. It is a little game we play in the interest of trade. We sent our Filipino crew members to negotiate for us, and the Mexican custom house adds a hefty surcharge to our taxes. The captain clapped me on the shoulder. Do not worry, my friend, this is not my first run. We're going to have maybe Phileas Fogg attempts round the world adventure. Well, at the moment, we're struggling to get round in time. We're going to have maybe 11 days to get from Mexico back to the UK. We smelled the smoke first, and then gunpowder sweetened by blood. Acapulco was just visible in the distance, wreathed in lightning-flashed smoke. It was impossible to see what was happening. Through binoculars I could make out flashes of gunfire, lit buildings, dark smoke plumes. Are the Spanish trying to retake Mexico? I demanded of the captain, who looked bewildered. King Amadeo hardly writes me informative love notes, he retorted, before he gripped the brass-handled telescope swinging from his belt. He turned to the crew. I need a volunteer to climb the rigging and see what is up ahead. I will do it, I volunteered rashly. Even Monsieur Fogg appeared to be pale by a shade at the idea. The crew stared at me with a mixture of pity and awe as the captain wordlessly handed me his telescope, a pair of aviator goggles, and a red handkerchief. Wave the handkerchief when you are secure, and we will raise the ship to give you a better view. I took a deep, centering breath before I climbed up the hatch and grabbed onto the ratlines. The wind buffeted my face, and the roar of the twin Antonian engines seemed amplified. Behind the comforting curve of the envelope, I saw an endless, dizzying stretch of sky, and the Pacific Ocean glittering far, far below. I closed my eyes and heaved myself up, imagining to grip the foot rope with my toes as I swung out and away from the gondola. I was braced against the wheeling sky, an impossible drop by nothing other than my trembling hands and feet clutching the rope. I looked up and planned my route, measuring the distance between the knots and noting gaps or frays in the hemp ropes before I placed my weight upon them. My acrobatic training gave me a certain dexterity as I climbed, and I saw rather than heard the airship's crew leaning out of the observation deck's portholes and cheering me on. I loosened a hand and gave them a rakish salute, feeling rather buoyant with confidence. I felt in that moment as if I were born to climb airships, and laughed sky-mad as the rough hemp ropes dug painfully into my palms. I made it to the widest cross-section of the envelope and waved my red handkerchief. I felt the hum of the engines grow sharper as the airship began to climb. Each shudder and yaw was more pronounced. And I laughed and laughed and laughed with the joy and wonder of it. Possible 2's finally having his moment away from his master. The utter impossibility of it. We humans are such ingenious creatures, my friends. It is so easy to forget when one's feet touch the ground. I extended the telescope as the ship bobbed in the air and peered at it at the bay of Acapulco, thronged with warships firing cannons at the city, and lit with unholy fire as they listed and sank. I saw their flags and shuddered. I will not recount how I climbed back down, how many times I slipped, how my palms bled and itched, and how I nearly pitched into the ocean. I will tell you how I made it back inside, and made my report to captain and crew. The French army is besieging Acapulco, and I said, and then I fainted dead away. Now, the captain called the passengers and crew together for an announcement in the morning. We will leave the French to their business in Acapulco and head to Panama. I nodded eagerly and agreed, not wishing to risk traipsing through a city under siege, even if it was besieged by my countrymen. Maybe we could have got a lift with some of the Frenchmen, I don't know. Monsieur Fogg was less sanguine about our change of destination, but made some calculations in his ledger and seemed satisfied. It is a detour, but not a catastrophic one, he declared. We tethered at Panama in the mid-afternoon. From the air I could see the snaking, gutted length of the canal under construction. It was certainly seemed a calmer spot than Acapulco, despite the heavy construction work. The crew hurried us off the ship, unflatteringly eager to watch us depart. Actually, this might get us further. We are now in Panama City, here we are. Let's explore, because we do not have time to waste. I don't particularly want to go to Bogota, but we may not have a choice. We've not been put in a good spot here. Panama City seemed a town perpetually on the edge of disaster. A great number of the inhabitants had emigrated to California during the gold rush 20 years ago. The 49ers, as they were called, had left empty spaces which were quickly filled by new immigrants, creating a polyglot society. I went exploring to see if I could find anything useful to our journey, and stumbled upon the construction of the Panama Canal. Great quantities of stone and dirt were being thrown into the air, undercut by the whistles of steam escaping and boilers rumbling. Fine machinery. Elephant-sized steam shovels painted bright red and blue. Dyed rooster feathers adorned the boiler, and a single operator sat in the carriage to control the winch, boom and bucket. I was accosted by a tall, sharp-eyed fellow in a pinstripe suit, glared at me. "You're here to watch or to work?" "My name is Passepartout," I declared. "I'm Gesner, the crew leader, and I don't allow any watching on my dig site." He pointed to one of the steam shovels. "Get in." We're going to comply without a second thought. Perhaps it was the authority in Gesner's voice. Perhaps I was rather too enamoured of the enormous power of the steam shovels. "Gesner Jr. will lead you right," he pronounced this with finality, caressing the bucket of the great machine. "Did you create him then?" I confessed, myself impressed. "I designed all the steam shovels, but Fanchon gave them life. She's headed back to Haiti tomorrow morning. I don't know what I'll do without her." He nodded towards a tall black woman even, who was checking the fuel barrels, occasionally dipping a finger in the tarry black substance and tasting it. But enough talk, time to dig. I examined the levers closely before selecting the most worn handle and easing it forward. "You were a born excavator," Gesner showered me with praise. "Are you sure you've not done this work before?" As I worked, I saw the woman called Fanchon move away from the site. If she was an artificer, perhaps she would be useful, but my shovel would not be stopped or slowed, and I worked until evening. I really hope this gives us some transport. Oh, this has not gone well. We could go to Acapulco. Is there no way to get to Port Royal or anything? Oh dear, we're in a real trouble here. I guess we go to Acapulco. That's our best hope, really. Arrives on Tuesday. Ah! What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Well, we don't want to go down into South America. That's not going to help us. That's going to send us going backwards. One could hire a caleche to travel the length of Central America, along which a good quality road had been established. There was only one curiosity. There was no driver. The carriage ran itself on a system of wheels, cogs, and leather straps. Do you suppose it is safe? I asked Monsieur Fogg. He glanced around the city we were leaving. No more or less safe than anything else, he replied, and I'm sure it will be fast. You say this? It's a long way up to Acapulco, and we should have disembarked there if we could. On the map, the road to Acapulco seemed to trace a hairline route along the curve of Central America, and I half expected the caleche to teeter left and right between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. But the carriage was soundly made and hardly rocked at all. A relief, since we were mostly on mountainous roads with long, uncharitable drops mere inches from every turn. The steering was automatic, another plus, since I did not want to take responsibility for driving at such a speed. A gauge, installed by the crafty builders of the mechanical horse, showed the distance to our destination, as computed by the remaining steam pressure in the engine. We might as well run out of oomph before reaching our destination. We rattled along in this contraption, my master and I, alone. We're going to have 7 days to make it to the UK. It's going to be really tight, and I don't think we're going to do it. On our second day, the carriage screeched to a sudden halt. Someone had laid a log across the road. I looked about before getting out, but saw nothing of interest beside the scrub, the rocks, and dust. Monsieur Fogg looked at me expectantly. He was right, of course. There was no option. I was sure it was a trap. Ah, of course it is. Don't move. We're taking your vehicle. Show yourselves, I called back, whirling her out. I'm unarmed. A lone figure rose from behind a rock, sighting along the barrel of a gun. Just one the vehicle, he called in a thick Mexican accent. Don't want to hurt you, but I will. Where are you going? I demanded. Perhaps we can give you a ride. The figure took a few tentative steps down the hillside, and that when I noticed Monsieur Fogg creeping through scrub around the back of the caleche. There was surely a peaceful solution. Please, I declared loudly, do not do anything hasty. I'm sure we can all travel together. Are you going to Acapulco? I am, the figure replied, and then onwards into America. My master was close now. Then there is no need to be rash. We can all travel together, I exclaimed. All? The figure demanded. There's more of you? At that moment, Monsieur Fogg stood up, directly behind the figure. I tried to gesture him to stay down, but it was too late. Now then, my master said sensibly, perhaps we can all get on with our journey. The figure whirled about to face Monsieur Fogg, and I called for calm. We can all travel together, I declared, peaceably. The figure shook its head and stepped out of the caleche. I'm taking your carriage. Now get that tree trunk out of the road. We sat down and did nothing. The bandit stared at us down the barrel of the gun, then lowered it. Very well. We will travel together. Now help me, damn you. We agreed and moved the log aside. Together, we moved the log from the road and all boarded the caleche and rode in stony silence into Acapulco. We are not staying here because we do not have the time to waste. The lady's name was Catalina Barraza, and she was going nowhere. Instead, she was running away. What from? The working conditions in the factory where I am employed. I hear there is a better life to be had in Acapulco, and I no longer care not to try it out. But how did you end up to be midway there? That was not midway. I am from San Miguel. Of course. We rode the rest of the way in silence, and were grateful to disembark the caleche and stretch our legs. We are going to have to explore here, and we need to find... we need to find a way to get out of here. The French had tenuous hold of the Mexican port of Acapulco. The bay was crowded with ships firing upon each other, and airships rained fire and misery down upon the slope-roofed buildings. French soldiers fought Mexicans in the smoke-wreathed streets. We're going to keep to the French-held docks, where our white skin and my command of the mother tongue kept us from suspicion. You are not soldiers, a soot-stained Sioux lieutenant remarked, clutching his rifle close. This is a dangerous place for a civilian. It's a dangerous place for soldiers too, I retorted with ill grace. What is the French army doing here? Something about the Mexican government's debts, the Sioux lieutenant shrugged. I hate this goddamn city. Why don't you leave? I shouted back. Leave this place? Leave the army? He shook his head, looking sick. Then what would I go do? Go be a farmer in Provence, I shrugged. Surely anything is better. Keep your head down, the Saw lieutenant roared as the rope of fire lit a nearby building. He led us to a warehouse which had been converted to a makeshift garrison, and my master and I huddled there until evening fell, and the bombardment of Acapulco paused the night, but we did not have a way out. Oh my goodness. We are really struggling here. We stayed the night in a villa, run by a local woman whose instinct for business had survived even the conflict raging into the streets. Another guest arrived, a woman, fresh into town. I demanded to know how she had made the journey, and she shrugged. There are automatic carriages that depart from the outskirts and an airship to San Francisco. Surely everyone knows this. I thanked her profusely, finding a way to leave this hellish battleground. Several, in fact. This is not going to work. We can get to Houston. That's our route. That's our route right there. Right, we're getting out of here. We're going on to Houston. In fact, we're going straight to New Orleans. It arrives on Friday. Let's go. Open luggage. That's fine. We'll just get rid of that. We're embarking. Let's go. We do not have time to waste. The caleche we found was not automatic, but occupied by Monsieur Jameson, American missionary, and Madame Amandine Jameson, his French Creole wife. I don't know who you fellows are, Jameson cried as he clambered aboard amidst the sound of gunfire, but get yourselves aboard, won't you? We do not need to be asked twice. Let us converse and see if there's a way from New Orleans up to Washington. Is there any way we can get across? Washington into New York, perhaps? New York to Miami? New York to Caracas? Okay. I mean, we'll be heading straight for New York, and then we're not going to have the time, really. Something tells me we're not going to make it. We fled Acapulco by caleche, all of us clinging to our leather seats as the mechanical horses breathed steam into the air. I'm grateful to be away from Acapulco, I gasped, a nervous glance backwards, towards the besieged, smoke-wreathed city. You should give your thanks to God, Monsieur Jameson said decisively, looking as though we were about to force me to my knees then and there. Madame Jameson lifted her hand and made a mocking face behind its shield. I had to look away lest I laugh. To avoid any further temptation, I spent the rest of the day silent, watching the landscape as we wound our way north to New Orleans. Ooh, this is going to be a tough one. Both Monsieur Fogg and Monsieur Jameson were sleeping when Madame Jameson reached her hand out to me. I took it automatically, and her fingers tightened around mine, and then stroked very deliberately down my wrist. I shivered. I felt her sigh and relax into her seat, though her hand was intertwined with mine. Her husband snorted in his sleep, but she ignored him. I feel very alone sometimes. When you speak, I can imagine that I am a young girl walking down the Champs-Élysées in Paris without any cares. She said nothing else, and we stayed like that until our companions awoke. Many hours later on, we were into arrival into Houston, a small town. We stayed aboard, however, not availing ourselves onto the rest stop to disembark, and a few minutes later we were on to New Orleans. Let's look after Fogg, because he's really low on health here. Do you know much of New Orleans? I asked Madame Jameson, trying to keep the strange intimacy of the previous day out of my tone. I grew up there, Madame Jameson said thoughtfully, a smile playing across her lips. I think it changes the soul to grow up beside a river. What do you think, Monsieur Passepartout, having grown up on the banks of the Seine? The Seine is like no other river, madame, I replied, even the great Mississippi. She is fickle and wondrous. Then the Seine is exactly like the Mississippi, Madame Jameson clapped her hands together. You understand me precisely. The city holds one thing you will like, Monsieur Fogg, Jameson added. What's that? I asked on behalf of my master. The fastest train line in America runs from New Orleans. Thank you, I declared. This is excellent news. He nodded. I'm happy to help God's soldiers. An hour later, we caught our first sight of Mississippi, a thick brown ribbon of water whose curve we followed up the much mythologized city of New Orleans. Right, no time to waste. We need to get to New York. It arrives on Monday. We need to negotiate this departure tomorrow. We're going. On the Piedmont airline in 23 minutes. Let's get out of here. On the Piedmont airline, let's get going. The Piedmont airline from New Orleans was not, in fact, an airline at all, but according to its advertising, the fastest railway in America. What could be better for getting us to the edge of the Atlantic? Winning our bet now would require a miracle, but we still had every chance of a decent showing. Oh my goodness, this is going to be a close run thing into New York. Then from New York, we just need to get in to England, and it's going to be close. We settled ourselves in a carriage with one other occupant, an extremely large man who introduced himself as Charlie Sullivan, a lad from Birmingham, who was impressively sculpted, especially around the neck and upper arms. His moustaches were nonetheless perfect. Oh, oops. I asked him where he was going, and he replied, New York. I was boxing. I'm going home. You fought in a competition, I interrupted. There was an exhibition. I won. Third round knockout. I gulped. However, Monsieur Fogg's interest had been increasing sharply throughout the conversation. You are trained or self-taught? I've got a manager, Sullivan replied. He tells me what to hit. Excellent, excellent. I want to hear all about it. I sat back and enjoyed the conversation. The details of boxing are more intricate than one might expect, and hearing the business of cut and thrust delivered in Sullivan's so very English tones was quite informative. Little did I know how the details I heard would come to be of use to me. Let's look after Fogg as we get into Washington. Oh, we're going to have 3 days to cross the Atlantic. That's going to be very tough indeed. That Mr. Sullivan will, I think, go very far indeed. Mr. Fogg opinionated as I brought him kippers from the dining car. Is that so? Oh yes. His description of the transferal of weight from foot to foot was very well understood indeed. So you are a boxer, monsieur? I saw the shutters of his conversation beginning to come down. I went to boxing school. Boxing school? I asked. I think France is a very curious country at times. He attacked his kippers with some gusto. You should fight him, he said. I laughed at my master's joke. But Monsieur Fogg, as ever, was not joking, and he looked up at me with some surprise. Is something the matter? It seems you wish me dead, monsieur. Not at all. Merely exercised. He fought another forkful. You shouldn't be alarmed. I can teach you to box. I rolled back my sleeves. I'm sure you can, monsieur, and I am a quick learner. Or at least I thought somewhat confident in nature. Excellent. I've arranged for a space in the guard's van. Come. When had he done this? I do not know. I merely followed, and there was Sullivan, stripped to the waist, doing his warm-up exercises. Pis pour tout, he greeted me through a thick leather mouthguard. Sullivan, I declared immediately, as I removed my own shirt and tried to listen as my master provided some pointers. And then the fight began. Sullivan was a tough opponent, and if he chose to swing hard, he would brain me unless I defended myself. But he would not be able to slug on every swing. I would have to pick my moments to attack. To begin with, I kept my guard up, matching Fogg's demonstration from across the car. Just as Sullivan punched hard, the blow landed against my defence, and I shook it off as best I could. Strength and stamina are different, Monsieur Fogg called to me from the side. Your strength will come back if you swing lightly, but your stamina, once gone, will leave you out cold. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. I threw a heavy punch, putting all my weight behind the blow. While Sullivan made a quick jab, I overpowered him, landing a sting. We were both still lively, although he was faring a little better than me. Watch it, the next swim may be harder. I no longer had the energy for a heavy swing. I brought my defences up, once again protecting my face. We will go for a heavy punch. An excellent fit. An excellent hit, even. We threw a light punch. We timed it poorly. We raised our guard. And we threw a heavy punch. Well, hey, we won. Sullivan span about and fell backwards onto the floor of the van, defeated. Generous hands scooped me into the air. Excellent show. Most impressive. Sullivan was rubbing the side of his head and cursing in a version of English I did not recognise. I shook his hand as he was carried to a compartment to lie down. I believe this makes you lightweight champion of North America. More to the point, we won a little from our wager or two. £2,000, in fact. It was day 76. We barely had 100 hours remaining to go to return home. Hopefully that money helps us, because bloody hell we'll need it. Let's get into New York, and we need to find a way forward. I awoke, still smarting from my boxing match with Sullivan, and my master most generally decided he would fetch breakfast. You are most kind, monsieur. Indeed, and we cannot have you dropping the tray. He returned with black coffee and well-buttered toast, a most considerate choice to bring a Frenchman. At least I thought so, until he began to eat the toast himself and drank the coffee in a slurp. We arrived into New York later that day. I struggled to lift the cases with my tired arms, and we staggered off the train. Right, we're into New York. We need to explore. We need to cross the Atlantic in 4 days. We have about $6,000 to work with. Oh, is this it? Does that get us into England? Okay, that gets us into London. I was pickpocketed in New York. I seized the thief's hand, still in my pocket. You tangled with the wrong Frenchman, I exclaimed in triumph. The little thief looked up at me with thick, lashed eyes. I realised belatedly that the thief was a young girl, barely 10. I released my grip slightly, and she took the opportunity to curse in a thick Irish accent and bite me. I held on, despite the inconvenience, and finally she grinned at me, her teeth stained with my previous life's blood. How dare you, little madam, I exhorted. Ladies should not bite. She snorted. Sometimes ladies must. I looked down at my bloody arm. Truly it was a salutary lesson not to let my guard down in strange climes. Don't steal again, I commanded sternly, and she returned to my possessions as she agreed she would not, ever again, cross her heart, though her expression was shifty. I relaxed my grip, and she slithered away and lost herself in the crowd. I made my way back to our hotel before anything untoward could befall my delicate person. We need to get over to the UK. That's Reykjavik, that's not where we want to go. It arrives on Wednesday. We can't depart before tomorrow? That's going to be a lot of money, which we can do. Let's plan. No, we need to go back. Back into New York. We're going to spend the night in the hotel. Day 77. We passed an anxious night. With our 80-day deadline looming, every sunset seemed to carry extra weight. I attended to Monsieur Fogg and clipped his moustache with the hopes he would have a restorative night. We are departing ASAP for London. It arrives on Wednesday. Fine, hire the extra space. Let's go. Come on. Can we make it there in time? We will reach London in 3 days, barring any unexpected delay. We might just do it. Please, no delay. We have no money left. Adventurer Fogg accepted back shortly. Come on. We need to not have any complications on this trip. The ocean tore along beneath us. I enjoyed talking to no one. There was nothing I needed to know. No one to charm, flatter, or beguile into giving us aid. There was only the wind and the time. Passport 2, my master demanded. Make us go faster if you would. I went to talk to the boiler attendant. Faster, you can say. It can be done, but we will destroy the engines. We want no risk, no danger. Then I promise you, we will be in London in 2 more days. Oh, this is going to be close. Let's look. Oh. Monsieur Fogg looked out of the observation deck windows with perfect calm, as though we were not, with every passing moment, drawing closer and closer to London. My nerves were in shreds, and I was nearly chewing the rails with anticipation. I spent the remaining time watching every possible danger, one eye on the crew, one eye on the ship, ready to react to the slightest trouble, but nothing broke the peacefulness of our day. Oh, come on. Come on. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, have we made it? How on earth have we done that? That was so tough. I really thought we weren't going to make it there at all. We tethered at the airship dock in Hyde Park and felt for the first time in 79 days the feel of English soil under our shoes. At long last we had returned to London and in time to win the wager. Oh my goodness. Let us return. I seized my master by the collar and threw him into the steam carriages idling on the banks of the Serpentine in Hyde Park. To the Reform Club, I shouted, throwing £50 at the driver as inducement to speed. You'll have another 50 when we arrive. Now drive. There was no need for such unseemly haste, Passport 2, my master noted, but I was a man possessed. The streets of London seemed quaint and old-fashioned as they flashed past my well-travelled eyes. The carriages were mostly horse-drawn, and gas lamps rather than electricity lit our way as we raced down Pall Mall. The carriage barely shuddered to a steam hissing stop before I dragged my master from his seat and up the steps to the imposing doors of the Reform Club. I released him only when we reached the great saloon where my master's erstwhile friends stood from their stood from their chairs, gaping in an attitude of great shock. And there we go, achievement unlocked, completed trip, no banks, 20 cities. Monsieur Fogg only straightened a little, 80 days, and said in his calm voice, Gentlemen, here I am. The room erupted into cheers. Where had this crowd come from? Had they followed us inside from the street? I had scarcely noted them. I realised, as though a spell had suddenly broken, that we had succeeded, and my master had won £20,000. With the £4,000 we began with, and our remaining funds, it was a profit of over £16,000. Hardly a meagre sum. My heart began to beat, and I saw for the first time the grand interiors of the Reform Club, which had no doubt remained untouched since its founding some 30-odd years ago. The most advanced piece of technology within was a gilded clock set upon the mantelpiece. A few club members were muttering about the impropriety of alighting in front of a club from a steam carriage. I pushed my way through to Monsieur Fogg, who had nearly been swallowed by congratulatory crowds. You have won the bet, monsieur, I told him, and seized my master by the hand and shook it. I told him, and not merely a master and a servant, we were two equals. Monsieur Fogg pressed my hand warmly and did not remark even once upon the impropriety of my gesture. Indeed, though his cool gaze did not so much as waver or soften, I believe he welcomed the chance to shake my hand. Any gentleman will be fortunate to call you his valet, and you have been a worthy companion to me besides, Monsieur Fogg said, and I knew that, from him, there could be no higher praise. Mr. Fogg, one of the journalists in the crowd cried. What is next for the great adventurer, Phileas Fogg, and his loyal valet, Passport 2? My master looked at me. I've always wondered what is in the centre of the earth. I looked around at the faces of the assembled crowd and quirked an eyebrow. Anyone care to make a wager? Monsieur Fogg refrained from rolling his eyes. I believe, he said with great deliberation, that tonight I will have supper and go to bed. Come, Passepartout, it grows late. Yes, Monsieur Fogg, I said, and followed. Our journey around the world is complete in 79 days, with only £134 left. Wow. Celebrated Englishman Phileas Fogg wins round the world wager. Journey completed in 79 days, despite incomplete Indian Railway, failed mutiny en route to San Francisco, and captured by Kylie cultists. We had a lot of issues that we dealt with. We visited 25 cities, travelled 32,000 miles. We preferred steamships. We finished with 16,000. We travelled a lot by sea, not so much by land. A decent amount by air, and we spent £27,000 over our entire trip. Wow. What a game, and what a crazy route we took. Everything went wrong that could go wrong, and somehow, even doubling back on ourselves here in Mexico and Central America, we made it home to London in time. That, my friends, is around the world in 80 days, or 80 days. I wasn't planning to finish this today, but I just love this game. It's such a page turner in terms of sort of the story and I know the gameplay isn't a huge amount, but I just really enjoy it, and I've been going for a lot longer than I intended to. But this has been the grand finale of 80 days. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye bye. Expect a new series starting in the near future. Take care. Cheerio.